You're allowed.
So this is Senate Transportation. We're back live. We have the House Chair and Vice Chair of the Transportation Committee here. And we know they're powerful because this is one of our first visits by the press. And so we have the press here just because you came. So you must have a lot of power.
Wow. I don't know about
Use
that.
timer.
Well, yeah, the press never comes and visits us.
Oh, my.
So I relate that to you.
I related to the $884 million, but that's okay.
All right. You do need to state your name for the record.
Good morning, Senator. Thank you for having me. Matt Walker, Swanton Sheldon, Chair of House Transportation.
Ted Corcoran from Bennington.
How long have you been on the committee?
Too long.
I'm just checking. How many years have you been there?
What's that?
How many years have you been?
20, yeah. Me and Pat have been here for 23. Yeah.
23. Was I here when you came?
No, that was I had the pleasure of serving under Frank Major.
Oh.
South Burlington.
Okay.
Yeah. Mr.
I was chair of appropriations then. That was the,
Wow. Couldn't ask me about the weeks and weeks.
Now, so what'd you do in this bill?
Tens and tens of weeks that I've been in. If I was going to say specifically about the bill, the biggest things that are the most important perspective was in town highway structures in class 2 was applying what is affectionately known as the FIMBY rule. That was previously only one of the town programs to make them for the other two to increase the amount of money over time that will be available so that based on transportation revenues or on an inflation adjuster, that instead of always every year going back to the main line number that was available to them, and then having to work to increase it or potentially increase it each year, that this way there'll at least be a review of it every year. And if it should go up based on inflation or on increase in transportation revenue, that it would automatically go up. And the testimony that we took from the JFO that within a couple of years, we'd be substantially ahead through compounding in terms of the amount of money that goes to the towns in those two areas. That's the biggest piece that the bill does, and I felt was the most important thing that we were able to accomplish.
So, and I think we may spend a little time. That's based on our state revenues and inflation. And what do you peg the inflation to?
So that is going to be the same measurement that they use under the town highway aid program today. So
It's the CPI, and then it's whatsoever less, the CPI or the expenditures in the previous years. Which this year was 3%. So
I would just say to you that we found it in testimony difficult here because, for example, the agency is very clear about the cost of their projects between 21 and 23, slipping into 24, and that the cost of their projects has gone 40%. And the numbers, and when you ask numbers, or at least when we've asked numbers about what's going on at the town level with projects, there's really no good numbers out there. And it's really hard to figure out what the need is in towns. We have no scale on state highways. They can tell you how many poor, very poor, good, and in bridge categories, what's structurally deficient, what isn't. We have categories that we've got anything, so you can come up with numbers. It's very hard to judge that versus the towns. And so we're feeling a little bit at a loss of how to deal with the towns fairly in that. And I appreciate the looking at the revenues from the year before in doing that. But there does seem to be some disconnect in everything we do that deals with the towns.
Yeah, understanding. I think our main focus is, when we looked at the applications that were submitted, specifically in the class two, obviously we weren't even close. We weren't even the ballpark meeting the demand out there. So, I know the index is not gonna, solve that, but I think it's a cumulative effect over the years where hopefully it will start to build up and, then it becomes something meaningful. But, as this committee is well aware, the revenue outlook is pretty bleak in the gap in the next couple of years. We're looking at $30+ million.
That's an understatement.
So yeah, there's tough decisions to be made, but at the end of the day, if you look at the town programs, they've been, pretty stagnant. So, try to do the best.
But we certainly recognize that the same level of pressure that the state bid process goes out as the towns are in the same scenario in terms of hiring, working contractors and where they're going to be at. We also recognize that every dollar that we may have looked to shift into these programs comes out of a state transportation fund dollar. So we didn't tackle both. We thought that at least having some structural change that would guarantee some level of review each year was as important as looking at what we would do for this particular piece. And then every dollar we would take out of a highway project to put into a town project, it's going to have an impact. So this is sort of why we felt we had to go at least in some direction to show help and assistance to towns, especially in light of the amount of flooding that hit back-to-back summers and the amount of increased pressure that they find. So that's what we, as a committee, kind of went in that direction.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm actually really grateful that you put forward an enhanced quickly and I like the way that you did it. It's well written. So thank you for taking the time on that. My question, and I realize we're probably going to go through all the sections of the bill. It's shorter than I anticipated, so that's nice. But one of the pieces that we've discussed in this committee around county highway aid funding is how we have grant funding for structures and a series of other programs. And then we have a fixed formula for town highway aid based on the classification of roads. So I'm wondering if you have explored as a committee shifting some of the things that we have as grants towards a more formula-based approach like town highway aid, or if you discussed changing the amount that's allocated within the classes themselves on the formula side.
Yeah, I was about to take that, but no, we didn't, consider that per se, but I will say the previous 2 years under Chair Lanford, we did raise the cap on class 2. So we did adjust that, but as far as, making that a formula base, I just don't know if that would translate as well as town highway, but we didn't really delve into that. So,
Okay, thank you. I just didn't want to dig up old ground if you're.
yeah. But, I don't know if you want to go through the whole bill or maybe just talked about how we differed, which is a great, from the administration, like we can highlight,
I think
things.
highlight differences would be better.
Yeah.
We don't really need to go line by line.
Yeah.
We're not the house.
I like how you operate on that.
The vice chair is always in favor of brevity. Consistency, I'm not sure, all of those things. And history,
Yeah.
so.
We don't get all day to sit here.
Well. We'll take that and move from it. As far as the piece, we felt that as a committee that looking at the governor's recommend, and we did piece by piece, and every single section leader testified to each and every piece. And in the end, we felt that giving the agency facing the financial pressure that we all agreed to, sort of the big picture, that they have the maximum amount of flexibility in the budget that we passed that goes along almost entirely with the governor's recommend, barring a few minor technical changes and a few project changes that were technical in nature. That our goal is to give, especially looking at the light of this winter, and who knows where the next one will be when it comes time. They have maximum amount of flexibility in their maintenance budget, their central garage budget, and piece to carry out the work in our aging infrastructure. So you're not going to find any major changes from the governor's recommend to our bill.
You had,
No, did you say none?
No, well, no, there is. There's a couple, and maybe before you answer the question, but I mean, I think the first one is we deleted a section. I think it was original section 3 or 4. Damien can correct me on this, but it had to do with towns when they go out and apply for a grant, and then, you know, they do the scoping, whatever, and they're like, oh boy, we want to hand it back. That's the state wanted to recoup that money, and we had the RPCs in and Mount Leagues, towns and cities, and they had heartburn over that because there wasn't quite clarity, and we couldn't come to an agreement on that, so we just struck that section out. So, you know, I don't know if you guys are gonna have some time to revisit that and maybe get the parties in, but we couldn't come to an agreement on that. And then the next minor change was on the rail bank trails. There's a whole list of do's and don'ts, and maybe Senator Weston remembers this, but and maybe even Senator Brennan, but there was a section around hunting. And before, when we dealt with that, you know, there was major heartburns of not allowing people to do hunting on bridges, and because that was the only spot they could access, you know, certain. So we wanted to make clear that fishing was allowed. So we yeah, you can still fish on the right of way within the rail bank trails, and so that was a minor change.
You allowed fishing?
We're allowed fishing. We didn't want to take that away because they probably would have came in here and drove us. And
Well, you know, quite frankly, when you have the Moyle Valley Trail running from one end of your district to the other,
yeah.
and the river's right there, it's probably a good idea.
Yeah, so we made that clarification, and another thing that we passed out of our committee, but the appropriations deleted, was a more of a technical aspect, and that was the ACCD, the $1.4 million that goes towards you know, EV charging and, you know, housing developments. They just struck that and just put it in a big bill.
Was that a recommendation from you guys? Why did you?
No, we passed it out, and it was the appropriations amended our bill. This was striking, and they said they just wanted it, I think, in all one spot.
Put all the transfers in one
Yeah,
place.
in one location, so.
What I was, you know, the
Yeah.
fact that the registration infrastructure fee for EV chargers specifically goes to multi-dwelling and business. So that money had to go to ACCB for that work. When I was referring earlier about changes, I was referring to the budget portion. There were language changes that Representative Corcoran's highlighting, and I was referring to sort of the financial changes, which is why you see really the chart and whatnot that accompanies it is really the governor's recommend versus the House and versus the previous year. So as opposed to the recommend versus we didn't get the budget on the page yet, but that'll come your way, my bad. But I was referring to the financial side of it. On the language side of it, the rail banking, there was a change to the Green Mountain Transit. Sorry about it. Green Mountain Transit's charter language as the only charter service, and the effort there was to make sure that it was, although there are changes being considered, what we adjusted the language was to make sure that it was permissible that they may or may not make changes, they may or may not provide services in certain areas, as opposed to saying they will do it here or they won't do it there. As the review goes on, we need to make sure the process is open, depending on what changes they made. The goal there was to have more permissive language than set hard in stone, so that could go in effect either way. That was in the Green Mountain Transit Charter piece.
Yeah, and I think this, at the top of my head, there was one other financial change, and that was there was excess money left over in the electrical IRP of 300,000. Didn't seem like that was being utilized. It was stagnant, so we redirected that towards drive electric. Drive electric. So I think that's
sorry. The white book, it's starting right from the top, I guess, it's adopt the white book. There was technical changes in section 2. Section 3, Route 36 in St. Albans, one of those rare circumstances where the town wanted to take over control versus the other way around.
no questions asked. You can have it.
The renaming of railroads and rail trails, that was sort of, then we moved into the rail banking, what could or can or cannot happen, which is going to affect basically like a roadway. is how the rail trail will go.
And I noticed that was all like underlying language as if it was new, but you referenced it, you talked about it before. So is it just taking from somewhere else and putting it somewhere new? Is that why it's all new language?
With a little bit of a change.
Yeah, so there's one new section there.
What's your name?
I'm sorry, for the record, I'm Damon Leonard from the Office of Legislative Counsel. There's one new section there, which is modeled on regulation of other rights of way. And it basically is saying what activities are not permitted on rail trails. So things like campfires outside of designated locations, things like that. So we can go through that. But that was what they added, and it's basically to reflect existing practice. But the recommendation they got internally from their council was, rather than doing this through policies and rules, it makes sense to codify the prohibited things and then build off that.
Those things were codified before, it was just in session law.
They weren't even in session law that I know of for the rail trails. This was they had it for other things, but they wanted to be able to do things like regulate things like people camping on the rail trail and things like that that were starting to occur. And the recommendation that they got was, rather than adopting rules, get the legislative blessing.
Okay.
Sure. So on the St. Albans transaction, is there ever a situation where you would say no, or you would suggest conditions? And does V-Trans look at that before it gets to the committee?
In this case, we heard from their town manager, and then we required a letter from the select board signed by all of them that they actually want to go in this direction. The agency did testify as to what they were asked about, the maintenance, the amount of bridges on it, the amount of work that was, and the section that they took, and what their intent. Then the town testified on what their intent was to do with it. But as far as a checklist of actually what they review in a request, I didn't say that I saw that.
Okay. Okay.
As long as they
So it's pretty
understand
much
what
a
they're
yes.
taking
The
on.
town was very much adamant that
Yeah.
they were going to move. They think they can put the sewer, the water and sewer lines much faster into an area. They have a particular intersection that they find important to their local development that they want to take control of, and they think they can change the appearance of the intersection much faster. And it goes around the town park and over to another section. They feel like they can do their economic growth, their ability to move forward faster is there, and the expense of the maintaining of the road. They feel they have a plan to cover that.
Okay.
With their local options tax and property taxes combined.
Great.
So,
And they have the TIF too. So that's big.
the city does, this is the town. I'm not 100%.
This is the town.
This is the town that's doing it, not the city.
Okay.
The city has had several TIF projects.
Right.
The town has the Walmart.
Okay. Something for
The town has the local
Okay.
option tax on the Walmart that they have quite a bit of resources to spend.
Okay.
Thus, a
So they have more than,
a brand new,
they have more than just the Walmart. There's quite a lot out north of town that is, well, there's quite a lot out around the town anyways.
absolutely.
Is the sports center in the town?
Collins Burley Sports
Yeah.
Center is I believe it is in the town.
It's a beautiful location.
Yeah, but there's hotels now, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there. If you go north of town, Franklin Park, you have all the car dealerships, and the town has quite a lot of stuff.
They do, and they have a new town hall and a new town garage and brand new sidewalks and a paving schedule and all kinds of things.
Okay.
Now they want to develop
local option.
now they want to develop the bay.
Have helped.
Okay.
This is basically Lake Street coming out of the city when it crosses over past the town fire department. From there, all the way to the bay, to the intersection of the bay, and then around the St. Albans Bay Park.
Okay. Great. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you had a bill, H 426, known as Kurt's bill, which was creating a unified resilient transportation system. And it doesn't appear that any of the sections of that bill made it into the T bill. Although when I look at the signature, when I look at the co-sponsorship, it seems like a majority of your committee I'm wondering if you could describe how you looked at that bill, why none of the sections were included? Was there a decision point on each one? Just to illustrate for the committee, this was a bill that was kind of made as two sister proposals by a group of legislators in honor of Kurt McCormick, who passed away last year. And the goal of the bill was to improve pedestrian and bike safety, support our climate goals. And the bill that I've talked about, S75 on our side, basically mirrors the proposal. And I think the original intent of the introducers of the bill was that it would end up in the T bill, but I'm not seeing any of those sections. And I'm just wondering if you could describe why that is and why none of those sections felt relevant.
All the requests from any member on the committee for any testimony or any witnesses or any portion of the bill were all heard and brought onto the agenda. And in this particular case for that bill, there were none.
I also add, it's true, but I will say it came down to timing. I mean, we have a crossover date of, I think it was March 17th. We officially didn't get the bill until I think the week before we're about to adjourn for town meeting. So when we came back from town meeting, we had 1 week, and that is a huge bill. So we just couldn't. It was the timing. That it has no reflection on the bill, but you're not going to pass any major piece of legislation in a week.
That makes
So-
a lot of that's a really helpful
Yeah.
reflection, because some of the pieces of the bill just seem pretty non-controversial, like $12,000 for e-bikes. I mean, maybe I'm overstating it, but that's one of our most well-loved local economy driving bills that we did. And there were all sorts of things around complete streets that weren't added. Did you discuss complete streets at all, or any implementation of bike and pedestrian safety measures?
We took testimony on complete streets and state planning, but not related to this bill. Representative Lally is one of her biggest focus areas, and the agency was in to comment on that, as well as Forest and Parks on their piece in terms of penalty that they do. We spent a fair amount of time on that. But in relation to the bill you're specifically referring to, the timing of it and the requests from the members of the piece didn't happen. And I'm saying that it was, I guess, the last week. It wasn't anything other than it didn't come out. And then by the time we scheduled a walkthrough through it, the day that we got it, so that we could go further with it. But at this point, there was no way that we could do anything with it in the timing of it.
So you would say that, let's say we did take a really good look at S75 and we saw sections of it that we liked and that we wanted to add to the T bill. The reason that you did not put maybe the corresponding 426 sections was not due to disagreeing, but rather the time. So
We
it
didn't
wouldn't
change.
necessarily
So,
it wouldn't necessarily be like a conflict if we introduce those things into the bill, that it's a point of disagreement, but rather a timing issue. Because I don't want to, I guess the reason I'm asking questions is there's a lot of sections in that bill that I'd like to advocate for. But if you said, yeah, we went through the bill and we disagreed with every single section of it, our committee did not like it, that would make me do a different tactic. So that's kind of what I'm trying to
Yeah,
get.
I mean, I guess, I appreciate that, but then it comes down to timing. Even the simplest things that you thought was like a no-brainer, we could just slide in there.
Yeah.
I think one piece that was in your bill was the credit card for EV charging.
Yeah,
We thought, I was like, oh, we could put that in. And then we started talking about it, and apparently it's not so easy to transfer that over. Apparently there was some heartburn on to do that. And the money would be some litigation out west,
wow.
but the problem is like, if you stick that, I mean, I think ultimately we think that's a piece for next year. It just is to do our homework. If that goes in our bill, I mean, you guys sent us a nice hefty DMV bill, and that's going to take, a little bit of time on our part to do.
It's a simple bill.
Yeah.
You sound like,
report.
you sound like the
It's a
presenters.
simple
You sound just
bill.
like every presenter that sits in the chair. It's just a simple bill, just push it. That's where I should have started. This is
Yeah.
just a simple bill. You should push it through. If there was discussion about any of those pieces of it, Senator Whitehead would have been before the presentation but the committee did not take testimony or any position on any of the items in the bill.
Okay. Okay, well, I respect that and I understand the timing. I think there's a lot of very important pieces that unfortunately didn't get maybe the light of day, like local speed limits. I mean, there's a lot of things that can support municipalities that I read in that bill that I was hoping to see in the T bill. So I do hope that we spend time on that, as well as adding potentially S4, which is another trails related bill. That I was informed we would consider inside the T bill. So just putting that out there, those are the conversations that I would like to have on this.
I want to back up a little bit. You talked about giving flexibility to the agency, given the revenue problems and all of that. I think, have you seen the sheets about the projects that from the federal level that are on hold?
As far as the levy monies, or is this another
Well,
list?
Yeah,
Oh,
have you seen that before?
Good job. Pulling that out of the.
yeah.
I'd be happy to do it, literally ready.
Yeah.
What's the date on this one?
Yeah, I don't know if you saw that or not. We saw a list
Okay.
with,
March 18th.
if we didn't get the JTOC transfer, what that would have done, but.
No, this is,
Yeah, I don't think we saw that. At least I don't recall seeing.
in the appropriations bill that
There we
came
go.
over from the House. There's specific language about a reduction in revenues, both from the federal level and on ours. And as we go through that, I think there's a number of quite large projects that are outside of the formula funds that are have a federal match that have been put on hold that we might want to consider. And I think we'd like to work with the House to see if there isn't some way that if we had large projects not included in what if the feds pull the money, how would the legislature have some role in helping the agency to think about this?
Yeah, we'd be open to that. I mean, there's no doubt there's unknowns, and I think the biggest one is around our purchase and use. That's the only one that's projected to go up, but I think they might need to recalculate
Well, I
that after the
We,
tariffs and
we
the cost of
might
cars.
be,
I
we
think
might be really close in our thinking on that.
Yeah, so, well, I mean, that's getting that back from the ed fund, but I think just the overall money that they projected that it was gonna bring in, I think is not accurate.
Well,
Yeah.
there are a number of projects that are quite large
Yeah,
that the feds have put on hold. And we'll be looking to see if they didn't show up and we ended up not in session. Would we want to leave it to the agency alone without us, them at least reporting to us how they're dealing with that?
Are you suggesting that you're gonna call a meeting of the Joint Transportation Committee?
Well, it might be,
Yeah.
in the past, joint fiscal has played a role. And your appropriations committee did think about this in relationship to the general fund. I would just say I work in Winooski and, the bridge between Burlington and Winooski is a pretty big bridge. And,
Take a bite for it.
right. If that gets pulled, and that bridge was built very shortly after the 27th flood, so it's well over 90 years, it's approaching 100. What role would we want to have in thinking about what the priorities of the transportation are. And should the agency bring their plan back to somebody here? And, because that, it's not an insignificant list.
I would agree that it always gives me heartburn when we're adjourned and certain things happen. What? So I mean, speak for myself, I wouldn't post any check back or, yeah.
It also points to a much bigger picture when you talk about the Burlington-Winooski Bridge. You're gonna find a number of towns on major routes and thoroughfares, whether it's in Brattleboro or Route 78 bridge in Swanton that carries major commerce that's right in the middle of a village, but is truly critical to the state. Just like Burlington-Winooski is critical to people way beyond Burlington-Winooski, but it's in those town limits. So there's, I guess, two parts to your question, or more, many parts, as always. A bridge isn't a bridge, right? I guess location, but who uses it and where it goes and how it's paid for may or may not always be the most fair.
And the ones that are on hold here are federal funds, but not formula funds. So how it relates to the thinking of the agency, if some of those do get pulled, if they do, and they may have an updated list to the last time that we took a look at this, but I would encourage your committee to at least sit down and to get have them present what they know.
Thank you.
So, are there any other questions for our friends in the house?
Yeah.
And do you?
Well, I just have a question about the transportation
And then
board
we
section.
need to move along.
Like, what was the reason for that?
I'll say that was by request, and it just gives them authority to appoint their board members. And I think one was almost, just enacting a policy that they do.
Yeah,
Correct me if I'm wrong, the T-board sections there, we didn't really spend a tremendous amount of time on it.
Okay.
It was more of a, yeah,
administration.
And then
Those are fairly small changes.
yeah.
There was a change that was discussed that would have required a lot more time and discussion, and that was it ultimately pulled out of the bill as a proposal from a third party that involved technical changes, a number of things relating to outdated jurisdictional language, but it would have sparked a much clearer discussion that there wasn't time for. So because it is regarded as technical, but also bringing into question jurisdiction of Public Utilities Commission and T-Board. Historically, for those of you who don't know, Public Utilities Commission had jurisdiction over some transportation issues. And there are sections of the statute that say Public Utilities Commission, where the T-Board currently exercises jurisdiction over some of them, but maybe not all of them. So this was it turned out it wasn't just a simple technical change. So that was scrapped. So this kept the basic changes proposed by AOT and scrapped that larger discussion for another time.
Okay, thank you.
yeah, go ahead and then Pat, and then we're gonna wrap up.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So we, as you started out, we have a major revenue shortfall that we're starting to experience and that's also growing. Did you discuss any revenue sources or changes to address this, or hear anything that we should pursue?
I like the question because we spent a significant amount of time. When we talked about the committee, we had a sort of a timeline of getting the T-bill through within time frame, but with always one bigger picture that we sort of brought everything back to, which is addressing this long-term funding gap and every piece that comes through that. And obviously what our House Appropriations Committee did in terms of the JTOC transfer and supporting that, and also changing the language so that it wouldn't be an issue, was a huge win overall. So, but in that light, we heard testimony on all of our fossil fuel taxes, from the gasoline and diesel presentation, and what an increase may or may not do to that. And of course, the we took some testimony on the trends and the usage and the amount, as it continues to fall, what the projection is and the impact that has. We heard testimony to, an overall view of, retail delivery fee, and there's quite a bit of, support amongst the committee to hear more. That's a lot of talk about the impact it has on class 3 and 4 roads and the delivery of these trucks up and down all
Yeah.
over and whatnot. There's a fair amount of support in the committee to hear more about that. But we went into a general piece related to that. We also got an entire background piece on purchase and use, the history of it, where it came from, suggestions on the possibility of perhaps looking at language for a cap. And then maybe a rollback of it, but perhaps now that it's over 50 million, that might be enough. We took a fair amount of discussion in committee time about the idea that transportation should pay for transportation. And perhaps if we let transportation pay for transportation, we would all be in a much better place as the deterioration continues to happen. And we took a fair amount of testimony about that deterioration. So we did gas tax specifically. We got background on the diesel tax. We did get some background on how it works and where it's at. Retail delivery fee. We spent a fair amount of time, of course, on the mileage-based user
Yeah,
fee.
that was,
We updated the language around the mileage-based user fee. Our appropriations committee, as you had already were talking about earlier, gave us an additional $1 million, put with the 700,000 that had already been set aside as match money if we weren't to get the federal grant related to mileage-based user fee. There was actually discussion that the mileage-based user fee and some support in the committee, and you'll see it in the language that says not just the state gasoline tax, but electric vehicles would be paying state and federal taxes, and they should be looking at the mileage-based user fee being something closer to that while still retaining some level of value of being electric and not gas. But just saving the state, there's quite a bit more money there while we wait for the Fed to decide what direction they're going.
yeah, they're saying,
The electric vehicle people could be paying a fair amount to make it comparable to a gasoline car, or at least maybe only slightly less, because we want to encourage that electric vehicle ownership. That if it was just the state tax, that's what's them here. You have that entire federal gas tax, perhaps they should be somewhere a little higher. And the intent is for the agency to look at that as they ramp up for the next year, that our EV pros were thought that maybe that number should be a little higher, and that would be additional revenue for the agency. So we spent a fair amount of time on this big picture of where else is there money? Should that be capped? Should we look at mileage? Should we be capped for some use? Should we look at mileage-based user fee, which we are, and further? And should we look at it at a higher amount? Should we look at the gas tax if we really want to discourage the use of gasoline? That's an area that is a political, so I'm told, third rail. I've heard other people in this committee may or may not have been involved the last time it was looked at. I think that that's something that, although it may be declining, it's still significant. Should I call somebody old? I'd have to ask
Yeah, I
to
heard
review that.
but just to be clear,
So
you
we would
didn't
spend a
call
lot of time on,
lots and lots of discussion, many different avenues, you did not coalesce around one solution.
we did put the language regarding making sure that we're moving paper on mileage-based user fee and being
Out
more
of the-
potentially and being more expansive on that.
But that doesn't fill the gap. That
No.
just brings us up to.
We
where
did not put language in here that goes actively after any of those,
Okay.
but I would say that the committee is well primed for
Then, okay.
further action in that area, especially around the idea that let transportation pay for transportation. Transportation generates enough revenue to make significant impact, but it doesn't stay. And we made a major step forward this year in keeping that public safety money, the JTOG transfer in here. The next step is perhaps a step down or some other combination of those, but we are very much open to understanding that, and that I think that letting transportation pay for transportation is a model.
But well, this ad is that our committee is well aware of the political climate that we're in, and we want a bill that's gonna pass. So we had that in the back of our mind. We understand the reality of things, so.
Thank you.
Just a little caveat.
No, I'm good. I just had a question on the T-board thing, but I think the language says it here. So,
Great.
And I wanted to, I'm gonna try to be respectful and get our next witness in for 10 to 15 minutes. Public transit, is, going through some upheavals. Did you guys take a look at public transit? And some of the pieces in it.
Multiple times. And since we have all day, we brought them back in for a third round of, meaning the agency came back in to testify and to clarify some of the more recent media reports. We also had multiple providers, both in the regional sector and in the Green Mountain Transit, back into the committee to testify. I do see that it's on your agenda coming up very soon in the next couple of days. We spent a significant amount of time
Actually,
in there.
I'll get to that, but specifically my question, how comfortable is your committee with the shifts in routes and all that?
Every provider testified that they were in favor of the recommended budget as is, and that the review process that's going on in terms of the grants that are happening and the overall budget for 26 sort of timing came out at the same time. And sometimes there's a little bit of confusion over what's actually happening in terms of what's the 26 T-bill, 25, 26 T-bill happening versus what the review of the grant process that's happening and the negotiation between all of the regional providers and what the piece is, as well as Green Mountain Transit. So we have a pretty significant row on our committee that that wanted to dig into it multiple times. So we brought them back multiple times. So there's certainly concern out there, but there's an awfully big picture of ridership and trying to get back to levels of pre-COVID ridership. And there's no getting around that work from home and policy, or even particularly even in our state government, the amount of people that don't come to the office anymore puts us in a spot of moving an awful lot of it, nearly empty buses in a lot of places. We also took significant testimony that microtransit is a much more expensive per rider activity, although may provide the services that are demanded, but we have to figure out what level we're willing to pay for that, because I think the committee there's been a number of pilots.
Yeah.
Those pilots are expensive. Those pilots now they're coming to a spot and they're really looking very aggressively at what does and does not work. So I'm trying to answer your question in that there was a lot of pieces to it, and the committee took a significant amount of testimony on it.
But yes, the comfort level is there. I mean, the only sort of, I would say, discussion that we had is how forceful that we wanted to be.
Yep.
We sort of put it in their hands to negotiate. You know, I think before it was, you shall realign this, and we backed off of that. There were some issues around that. And then just issues with the employees melding together, one being Teamsters and one being not, and how those benefits and everything work in. So there was concerns around, but yeah, Chair Walker's right, the agreement's definitely there. I mean, I think we're looking at a $1.5 million cuts in a row right now. So, something needs to be done for sure. So the question is, how forceful do we want to be?
But
We said,
I think we heard the same testimony
Yeah.
that the providers felt like,
yeah,
the handoff in that, that's been most of our testimony too. There is, I would just say to you, the later in the week part, there is some concern about if there are significant Medicaid cuts across, in the general fund area. And though that with a number of hospitals in deficit across the state, it may mean that we have some hospitals, Gifford, North Country. I don't think St. Albans is in the top positive. I can't remember, but I think they've got a deficit too. If there's cut in services, one of the only ways to deal with that is medical transports. And so we're going to spend some time in here specifically on that issue. And that's a mixed bag, because that has, for lower income people, has Medicaid, but there's a whole bunch of people that are older, they can't drive at night, that are Medicare, which there's no. So I don't see how, though, if the medical delivery of medical services changes, that we won't be dragged into that. So I think we're into taking a look at that, the medical transports that are out there. So, and that's specifically what this week will be for us. I think at this point, we have about 10 minutes for you. Sorry, Brown.
We're on the clock forever.
Oh, that, they don't ask any questions. 5 minutes.
They asked plenty there.
Thank you very much.
You get us some of those copies inside there.
Yeah, can we?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I would just say to the chair, you got your hands full
Yeah.
with that much, Chair.
Yeah. Yeah, Bennett.
They want copies of this.
Okay, bye. Thank you so much.
We'll make sure that happens.
Good job. So great. They're so great.
Is that yours? Take care of you.
Yeah, they
get the brownie points when I can.
Gonna throw this in because, you know, been on for a while.
Did we do this in 10 minutes?
I can try.
If we can't.
I can talk fast.
That,
Jeremy knows I can talk fast.
because, some of us do have a hard stop at the
Yeah,
end.
that's fine. I just need to, here's my link.
Our scheduler is a slave driver, so. But,
I do what you tell me.
no, no.
It's the other way around.
I do what you tell me to. I do appreciate that help. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. Carolyn Coda, Structures Program Manager. Thank you. I quickly put together some additional information that I would share with you. So one of the things I did want to clarify is that how we classify our bridges for condition is a little bit different than what was done prior to 2017. So we don't use the term structurally deficient bridges anymore. In 2017, FHWA switched to classifying bridges as either good, fair, or poor, and it's based on the square foot of the deck
Some
area.
of us are old.
I am
Sorry.
too. I am too.
Yeah, it's your birthday recently?
No, I used the term structurally deficient and she's correcting me.
So anyways, we inspect bridges every 2 years that are greater than 20 feet in length. So our bridges are rated as deck, superstructure, and substructure, and they're either good, fair, or poor condition. So a good is typically ranked as a 7, 8, or 9, a fair 5 or 6, or poor 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So what happens is a bridge is inspected. It has a rating for the deck of a 4, a superstructure of a 6, and a substructure of a 7. We would say that bridge is rated poor, deck equals 4. So we would take the worst condition for that bridge when we do inspections. So I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of how that plays out. So what I did here is a graph that shows our past and our future predicted interstate condition at our current investment level. So on the left, the percent of square foot deck area, and on the bottom is the year. And what we do is for the interstate, we have a performance goal of 6%. So
Or lower, I assume. That's not, you're not trying to get.
Yeah.
right, we don't We don't, no, we don't want 6%. So we really want 0, right? But we're okay if we are like, from a performance standpoint, if we're below 6%, we're good. So you can see that our good bridges, we're at an average of since 2008 to 2035. Our average is about, let's say 40% or 35%. Our fare is about, average is probably over the years is about 55%. And then poor, you can see in 2008, we were above that performance level.
We created the TIP bond fund in 2009.
Okay, that would explain it. So then now we're like at 4%. So we're really, it's good. On our state condition, we have a performance level of 10%. So anything, we want to keep things below the 10% mark. And you can see that in the future, our state performance goal, it's still below 10%, but it's getting a little bit higher, and that's based on, the age of the bridges. And from a fare standpoint, we're at about 45%, 40 to 45% average. And on the good, we're probably about 55% average. And then on the town highway, that performance goal is 12%. So we want to be below the 12% mark. And you can see that in the future, our town highway bridges start kind of increasing. We're not at the 12%. We're at like the 9-8%. Below that 12% rating, but from a fare, we're at about average of 40%, 42% fare. And on the good, we're at about 55% average from 2008 to 2035. And you can see in 2008, same thing, we were getting above that performance goal, which was not good, but we decreased. And then like 2019, 2020, we were at 2%. So just to give you just a quick overview of the age of the bridges, which kind of takes into effect the square foot, like in the 60s, when the interstate was built, we had 140 some odd bridges built in 1960. And then and you can see in the 2000s, the 2010s, and in the 2020 decade, we started to do deck rehabilitations and deck replacements on those bridges that were built in 1960. And on the state highway, you look at the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, we still have a lot of bridges on the state system that were built in the 20s and 30s. The 30 decade is probably a lot of our bridges that were replaced due to the flood. And you can see that over time, like in the 70s, we started replacing a lot of these bridges that were built prior to the 20s. And in the decade 2010, we replaced over 100 bridges, and in 2020, we're only halfway through there, and we've replaced close to 35 bridges. In the town highway system, again, we have a lot of bridges in the town highway system that were built prior to 1960. I mean, a total of it's almost 400 to 500 bridges, and then I think part of this replacement of where we can see is, we started bridge inspection programs. We started different things back in the 60s and 70s and started investment into the town highway bridges. And you can see that we have replaced that the age of our bridges and the number of them are more like on the 30-year mark for 1990. And I look at my own job. I started working for the agency in 1985, and I did a lot of work on town highway bridges over the years. You can see the replacement piece. So this graph is just a quick representation of where our funding levels are with the amount of square foot deck area that we have opened to traffic over the years since 2008. And you can see that the yellow line is our interstate program funding, and the green is the interstate deck area that we've opened over the years. And on the interstate program, you can see in 2016 and 2017, we opened up a lot of new bridges. Those were the bridges down in Brattleboro and some of the bigger structures that we have on the interstate. And then you look at 2018, yes, we had a lot of funding, but those projects are projects that take more than 1 year to build. They take maybe 2 years. They may take 4 years. And the same thing with our state highway bridge. We opened in 2011. That was our funding piece was about 130, but we opened up a lot of square foot deck area because prior to 2011, we had the ARA funds. We did a lot of work and we pushed to get projects out. And then it just kind of like I said, it takes sometimes more than a year to build a new bridge. In the town highway program, you can see that our fund, and also on the state highway, as you're looking at the future, we still have a lot of future. We're doing a lot of design work for a lot of the flood projects. You know, like I said before, we have like almost 30 bridges that we're replacing due to the flood. If you look at our town highway bridge projects that are open to traffic, in the square foot area that we have opened over the years, back in like between 2011 and 2017, we opened a lot of bridges and our funding was down below 20 million. And then you can see that our funding has increased, and a lot of that we have, let's just say 28,000 square feet of open deck area. Part of that rise in cost with the funding have to do with those future projects that we have down the road, and the fact that it does cost more to build a bridge than it was, 25 years ago. Quickly, Hartford. So,
Boy's favorite bridge.
It is my
Mhm.
favorite.
so, whoops.
No glass.
Yeah, well, I was wrong.
So,
Look at the-
no glass, but real quick, just Beachy Gorge Bridge. The plan is that we are widening it. We're creating like 6-foot sidewalks. We're building these fancy pedestrian railings, and then there'll also be a railing to prevent traffic from going onto the sidewalk. And so they finished one side. They're going to be working on the other side this year. Just to give you an idea, this slide is a picture of some of the damage that was out there. And this is a slide of, which is not good.
A little nervous to.
Yeah, but you can see that we replaced it quite nicely, new steel. And it's gonna all be painted, and just to give you an idea of some slide pictures underneath. And just to give you an update, that's what that railing's gonna look like. There's gonna be this fancy little arch thing. This is just a picture that they depicted in some of the presentations over the years. So we start construction in 2025, but April to go back. They're going to demolish the northern sidewalk and build that. They'll continue with their structural steel and bearing repairs. There'll be a shutdown again next winter, and then they're hoping that the whole project will be completed in 2026. And it's a $23.5 million project.
$23 million.
Well, I guess we'll say one life is worth $23 million. I'm just gonna say that. I'm so grateful for this project
And I'm done.
because it's a suicide prevention.
We did that
project.
before with the
So,
barriers.
Yeah,
So now
I'm really grateful.
I'm all set.
But you're right.
and I'm sorry it
Continue.
it had to be so quick, and
Can we ask questions?
we are at 12.
Okay.
Sorry, we have
So let me just say that if you have questions, you should have a copy of this presentation. And if you have questions, just shoot me an email and I can try and respond.
sorry. Thank you very much.